I'm Jeff Van Gundy, and you're listening to Thunder Bus.
Welcome to Thunder Bus with your hosts Watson and Bones.
I'm Watson.
And I'm Bones.
We get serious about the Thunder on this podcast.
But we don't get too serious, baby.
Bones, today we are going to take a step back and look at the Thunder's past, present, and future. So we had to bring on an expert. The OG Thunder media guy himself, ESPN's Mr. Royce Young. Royce, welcome on the bus.
Hey, good to be with you guys. I'm the OG, huh? That sounds cool.
You are the OG.
Yep, the original gangster.
So
I like it.
First off, we have a listener question from my buddy Connor Allen. He's a friend of the pod. Can you tell the story of how you started covering the team, and what did you do before Daily Thunder?
Now, I just have to make sure because I have a cousin named Connor Allen. This isn't my cousin Connor Allen.
I believe it is, actually.
Is it really? Okay. Well,
we went to school together.
Fantastic. Well, what's up, Connor? So really it rewinds to a pretty simple time. I graduated college at OU in 4.5 years, and so that last semester I was a journalism student, and I'd been writing for the student newspaper, covered OU basketball, OU football, OU softball, a number of different things. But that last semester I got married, and I stopped writing for the student newspaper and had to get like an actual job that like paid me some money. And right around that time was when the Seattle Supersonics relocated to Oklahoma City, and I was really missing writing, really kind of eager to just, it was just more of a kind of a passion that I had. And so when the team relocated, I kind of saw an opportunity for me to kind of scratch that itch again a little bit. And I didn't anticipate that it would turn into anything whatsoever. It was more of just almost like a personal diary. Like it was just kind of, I needed some sort of creative outlet to kind of share some of my thoughts. And I'm a big Chicago Cubs fan, and I liked following the team through a Cubs blog called Bleed Cubby Blue. And I thought to myself, well, like blogs are kind of this new thing people do to kind of write about teams. And I thought to myself, maybe I ought to do a Thunder one, even though I literally know nothing about the NBA, and no one should read a word that I have to write. There's at least, I guess I was at least I had a leg up because there was really no other Thunder expert out there because the team was so brand new. So I just decided to kind of start one up, almost just as like a hobby. Like I'm just gonna kind of do it on in my spare time, and then it just sort of became more of a passion for me, and I started to see it as a little bit of a vehicle to maybe get what I eventually wanted, which is a full-time job in the industry.
Well, it sounds like you were an early adopter. You know, you got out in front of the competition.
I guess so. I mean, that's what I really didn't do anything right other than just start a blog before everyone else. That's really all I did. Because
you're being modest.
If you go back and review some of the things I wrote, I don't think that you'd be like, wow, this guy's cutting edge. He's really, he is really like, he's got a chance at this. Like, no, I think the Thunder should trade for Rip Hamilton take that I remember having right off the bat was pretty poor. So, and probably had a lot of fact errors in it if I remember right.
Royce, how much of your job is building relationships with the players, and how hard is that to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big part. There's a fine line there because at the end of the day, I'm still a journalist and I'm a reporter. And while you're building a relationship with players, what you're trying to build is a rapport and a trust and an understanding that I'm not out to get you. I just want to tell your story and I want to do it fair. As fair as I possibly can, while also not really crossing that line to. And I think some reporters, it's tough to kind of toe this line where, you're not ever going to be friends with them. I think some people get delusional thinking like, I'm going to be friends with the players, but that's never going to happen. And so I think that sometimes you can kind of think that you are, or maybe that's a desire that you want. And players they're smart. They can kind of manipulate you with some of that kind of dangling that carrot out there for you. And so you got to be smart about it. And But there's no question about it that you have to build a trust and understanding with players. That, when it comes down to things that are mutually beneficial, but players don't need reporters as much as they used to. They have their own outlets. They can go on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever.
Players Tribune,
and they can find a ton of different. Yeah, Players Tribune. They can find any podcast. They can find any outlet they want to tell the story that they want. And so, you've got to kind of, I think in some ways a reporter has a tougher job now to build that trust, because you kind of have to convince a player that, like, I'm somebody worthwhile telling this story to.
Right.
And, that goes beyond like the scrum or anything like that. That goes to like being able to, walk out of the locker room with the player and get some background information where they won't just shoo you away. But they like you enough where they'll say, okay, I'll talk to you for a minute.
Interesting.
So I want to ask you, how did you feel about the team's culture the last couple of years under Russ and Paul George's leadership?
It was an interesting dynamic for sure, and I think it's one of those things where you don't really realize what it is until you see something different. And being around the team this year, there was such a comfort level with Russell Westbrook in the locker room that it was so clearly his locker room, his franchise, in some ways, that you didn't really notice how drastically different it would be until Russ was gone. And you saw some of the dynamics change within the locker room. And, I say this, I don't mean this to be a criticism of Russell, but, his leadership style is considerably different than that of Chris Paul. And I think that everyone that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. They're two different people and they have two different approaches. But, Russell was a very demanding leader, and really kind of tried to create a us versus them mentality. That whether that was with the media, whether
sometimes that was
with,
Russ versus them.
Right, Russ versus his own teammates in some way. But the media, or whether it was sometimes a lot of times opposing fans, other players, and Russ kind of built a trust with a lot of his teammates, because he was so fiercely loyal to them, and they would kind of want to play hard for him for that reason. But that's not for everybody. And, you see somebody like Chris Paul, who's a lot more inclusive, and the locker room was a lot more kind of lighthearted, and players, I think, were a lot more comfortable. I mean, I've told stories many times before about Russell. Everybody just kind of walked on eggshells around, like, am I doing this right? Is Russell going to yell at me about this? Should I, the pregame locker room, you'd go up and you'd talk to Jeremy Grant or another player, and you'd be just casually talking completely off the record about a movie or a TV show. And, you'd see Russell over there glaring at Jeremy Grant, and Jeremy Grant would be like, all right, man, I got to go. I'm about to get in trouble. So, like, there was that tension there, and that has been released without Russell there. And again, I'm not saying it's the wrong way. It's just a very, very distinct approach that Russell took to a locker room.
Well, yeah, we were going to ask about Chris Paul and what exactly has he done to shape the culture since his arrival?
I think a lot of it's on the court, as you can readily see, just the way that he plays. Again, how inclusive he is. He's a really big believer in just trying to make sure everybody's as involved as possible on the court. And, he's not somebody that tries to dominate the game, holistically speaking, like Russell did. I mean, Russell was somebody that viewed himself as kind of the complete centerpiece to a game, and that he had to do everything on the floor. And, obviously we saw it. Russell did it fantastically well for the most part. Chris Paul would kind of saw it as more of a collective, that like he was kind of the fulcrum to get the ball where it needed to go and run the offense as best as he possibly could. So I think that also kind of extended off the floor, that Chris Paul is very protective of his teammates, especially some of the younger players. But he is not somebody that I think tries to kind of generate a locker room of hostility. I think he tries to keep it as professional as possible. It's not like Chris Paul is like the most accommodating player in the world. It's not like he's pulling you aside saying, "Hey man, I want to talk to you."
Right.
But he is extremely professional, handles his business well, and immensely respected by his teammates, as you can well see.
Wait, so you mentioned the change of culture in their locker room, but there's also the apparent change of culture even on the court. How much credit does Billy get for the change in culture versus Chris Paul on the court?
I think Billy deserves a ton of credit, personally. Chris Paul is the guy that, you can kind of see it in action because he's the player out there making it happen. But, Billy Donovan had to kind of try to take some risks, and there's a buy-in factor that has to factor in when you're talking about a lot of these other players. The 3-point guard lineup that was so effective, that was the Billy Donovan brainchild, and he had to kind of convince Dennis Schroeder and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander that this is going to be something that's going to work. Mm-hmm. And I think for Billy Donovan to kind of bring the team together, and you can get Chris Paul, and he can lead by example, and you're never going to have to question what he's going to do. And I don't think Billy Donovan is like getting Chris Paul to necessarily buy in, because Chris Paul is a total pro. But it's about a lot of those other guys of adjusting their styles and thinking outside the box of maybe what they were used to. And one of the things I think Billy deserved more credit for this year is how he used Steven Adams. And kind of controversially, if you remember at the beginning of the year, Steven Adams is one of the league's best offensive rebounders. But Billy really thought that Steven had a better role to play, being higher up on the floor on the offensive end in the pick and roll, putting the ball in his hands, using him as kind of the guy to transport the ball side to side.
Almost like a Marc Gasol kind of role a little bit.
Yeah, Marc Gasol, yeah, he's definitely a good comparison for that. Where you're kind of like springing off of him and making plays and letting Steven kind of pass the ball. Like a poor man's Jokic would be another one.
Yeah.
Obviously, Steven doesn't shoot the ball like that, but kind of using him in that manner. And early on, it looked pretty rough. Like it wasn't going well, and I think the team was really missing Steven's offensive rebounding. But Billy was pretty committed to that and thought that was a way that they needed to play. And so, I think that a lot of those things, were kind of put in place by Billy Donovan in training camp, and the team continued to believe and continued to buy into it. So, these are kind of principles that Billy Donovan has been committed to since he was hired by the Thunder. But, and again, this is no slam on Westbrook, but like when you have a player of that gravity, like a Westbrook or Paul George, Carmelo Anthony, it's hard for an NBA coach to say, this is my system, this is my style, this is how we play. And that's just not really the way that the NBA works. So much of the way that, it's all personnel driven. And I think Billy Donovan has a personnel base that fits his style a lot more than maybe what he had previously.
I completely agree. And it looks like, that experiment with Steven Adams has been working out, because his assist rate, on his assists per 36 minutes doubled this season, which is incredible. That kind of success, considering how well Billy has done this year, are you surprised that he hasn't gotten an extension yet?
I'm not surprised, and I honestly don't know what will happen next with Billy Donovan, because I think there's a lot of moving parts within Billy Donovan's future with the Thunder. I think that there's a conversation that kind of has to be had with the front office, get an understanding of what the direction in the future might be. If Chris Paul's back next year, if a lot of the core pieces do return and the Thunder want to remain competitive, I think that there's a very good chance Billy Donovan will be back. But, at the same point, if there's a trade available for Chris Paul and the Thunder kind of begin this rebuilding process that we all know is eventually coming, I think Billy Donovan kind of has to ask himself, do I want to be part of that? And I think that's a two-way conversation. I think a lot of people think of it only in terms of, does the Thunder want Billy Donovan back? Well, I think you have to also ask yourself, does Billy Donovan want the Thunder back?
Great point.
If they're going to go into a complete rebuild where they're a 19-win team or something, I mean, there are a lot of things that come with being a rebuilding coach that I don't think a lot of people realize. It's like you go from, Billy Donovan left college because he was kind of tired of, in some ways, the immaturity of college players, the recruiting trail, catering to boosters, a lot of the off-the-court stuff that you have to deal with. He wanted to get to the NBA, get into NBA tactics, basketball strategy, and really coach. And when you kind of rewind back to being a rebuilding team, it's like, all right, I got to get my team to shoot around on time. Who's not here right now? And it becomes a little bit more of a tedious job. And I think that those are the types of things that you got to have a stamina to do that. And I honestly, I have no idea if Billy Donovan is interested in that. But one thing I would say to wrap it up, that I do think that, the Thunder have been pretty loyal to Billy Donovan. They exercised his extension when there was some criticism. Last year's team, some of the players weren't always happy with Billy, but the front office stood completely by him. So I do think that the Thunder have shown themselves to be pretty loyal to Billy Donovan. And so if it doesn't work out with him, I wouldn't say like, oh, they fired him or they didn't want him back. I think it would probably be more of a mutual decision.
Royce, shifting gears here to some current Thunder talk. But if Roberson comes back for some time in the playoffs, should we sign him to another contract?
I mean, it's a tough one because there's so much unknown with Dre, and we're talking about a guy that hasn't played basketball in 2.5 years. that's an amazing amount of time to go in between. And for somebody that we all know, as you guys know, I mean, you watch him all the time. He relies a lot on his his lateral movement, his athleticism. He's a great instinctual, intelligent player, but you got to have some of that other stuff too. And so you do have to kind of be asking yourself, like, where's he at physically? And I think that Roberson probably is as motivated to come back for this return as anybody because he's a free agent and he does need to earn himself a new contract. Because if you're an NBA executive and Andre Roberson's agent calls you up and says, hey, what do you think here? If I'm an NBA GM, I'm saying, well, I haven't seen the guy play in 2.5 years. What am I supposed to think? So like,
right.
Roberson needs to get on the court for his own mental health, I think, and just to kind of show where he's at and what he can do. And I don't think the Thunder would necessarily be opposed to it. I do think that they probably are looking at transitioning into playing some younger guys, whether that's continuing to try to develop Ferguson or, as everybody would love to see, more Lou Dort. But I do think that when it really comes down to it, it's about asset management. And if you can re-sign Andre Roberson at a good number, it's very tradable. Sam Presti doesn't like to let guys walk away with no value. And so it wouldn't shock me if they try to bring Roberson back, especially if they feel that he could have future trade value.
So, obviously we hope that he is healthy, and let's just assume that he comes back, when the season starts back up in Orlando. Let's assume he's healthy. He's playing 15 minutes a game. What position should he play at? Should he be like a defense first wing like he has been in the past? Or should he maybe steal minutes from Bazley at the backup four or a little of both? What do you think?
It's interesting you bring that up because I do think Roberson's kind of future in the NBA as he evolves and ages is to be more of a 3-4 rather than a 2-3. I think that's kind of an interesting position for him. I remember Dre saying a couple of years ago that he planned on watching a lot more tape on Draymond Green and how Draymond Green interacted in the pick and roll. And that is something that Billy Donovan tried to get into a little bit, was using Andre as a screener and, letting, making pocket passes to him and letting him kind of make decisions. And, that's an area he obviously needs to improve on if he wants to do more of that. But, that could be kind of the, kind of the stopgap for him if he is missing a little bit of that athleticism where he can't chase around the Bradley Beals and the Devin Bookers of the world, where you can kind of slide him over because he is 6'7" and extremely long, and he's been working out like crazy, so I'm sure he's bulked up even a little bit too. So I do think that's probably something in the best interest of Andre going forward, is to think a little bit more about maybe playing a little bit more of that 3-4 role rather than the 2-3.
And if he were to come back in time for the playoffs, do you think there's a chance he would be more helpful to us than Bazley would be playing the backup four in big minutes like that?
Possibly, but they're such different players that I think that it could be. I think it would probably be matchup driven, but I think where Roberson could be really effective is just the experience that he has in defending good offensive players. And we all know Terrance Ferguson's foul prone. You don't know what it'll look like for Lou Dort to be in some high pressure situations. If one of those guys gets in foul trouble or something like that, you're in a series against the Rockets, or if it is the Jazz or whatever your series ends up being, and you need somebody that can use their savvy and their experience. You can lean on Dre, and I think one of the things that it continues to be attractive about Andre is that he does have a versatility to him, that it's not just, hey, go out there and guard James Harden. It's, hey, go out there and guard whoever. Guard Russell, guard James Harden, guard B.J. Tucker. He can guard just about anybody. And this is, again, assuming that he can get back to a somewhat of a similar level. So, I don't think that he would necessarily be stealing minutes from anybody else. If anybody, it might be Ferguson, but I think that it would probably come down to more of just where does the matchup dictate that Roberson could be effective?
Well, Royce, you mentioned Ferguson, and I was wondering, why do you think Ferguson has struggled, and do you think he can bounce back?
I honestly, I just think it's a confidence thing. I think Ferg just has confidence issues. He can really get down in the dumps after bad games. I think sometimes, and you guys have seen it, where some of the things that he's tried to work on and develop just haven't come. Like where it's putting the ball in his hands a little bit more. The Thunder have really kind of been eager to see him be somebody not just planted with his feet in concrete in the corner, but somebody that can catch it, drive it, kick it, relocate, kick it again. And he's just not been able to find that kind of rhythm. And, I do think Ferguson is an extremely good defensive player. I mean, I think we can all see that. But at times he's a capable 3-point shooter, but he does struggle with being consistent as a shooter. And, if he's not going to add any more of like a dynamic to his game, then sometimes you're going to have to ask yourself, like, what are we getting here? And so, when it comes to kind of the direct comparison right now, which is Lou Dort, I think everybody can see it when you watch the games that like Lou Dort is just kind of a ball player. Like he just kind of makes plays. He's out in transition.
He's fearless.
Yeah, and he doesn't have that sort of hesitation. One of the things I've always said with Ferguson, like, he's one of the best athletes in terms of like leapers in the NBA.
Oh yeah.
How many posters does Terrance Ferguson have? Like, can you guys think of one poster where he's like gone up and just like crunched one on somebody?
Against the Lakers B squad his rookie year, but that's pretty much it.
Exactly. And so I that's something where it's like I would want to see Terrance Ferguson just like dunking on people because he's got that capability, but he just doesn't have the kind of fearlessness that a guy like Lou Dort does. And at the end of the day, I think that that's kind of what gets in his way.
Well, how real do you think Dort's performance is down the stretch? What are the chances he becomes a league average shooter from three?
I don't know. I think the shooting stuff is hard to quantify just because it is small sample size. And look, Lou Dort, I don't believe is like going to be a plus 40% 3-point shooter. I think that he got in a good rhythm and had some nice games. I think where Dort is interesting is that he played a lot of point guard at Arizona State. He's somebody that you can put the ball in his hands. Again, we're talking significant differences here from Terrance Ferguson. Is that and again, if Billy Donovan remains the coach, these are things that Billy loves. Is that capable ball handlers at all 5 positions, guys that you can rely upon to make a play, and the ball doesn't stop with them. And Lou Dort is not somebody that stops the ball. And I think that is a huge plus to the way that he plays, that you can reset and run a counter pick and roll with Lou Dort, whereas Ferguson would be like, get this out of my hands. Like, I don't know what to do with it.
Right.
So, I think the shooting is obviously great. And, it's easy to pay attention if the ball goes in the basket or not, because those are 3 points, and that's a big deal. But I think the Thunder kind of view a lot of what Dort does as the shooting. If that remains good, that is just like, that makes him just incredibly more valuable. But there's a big value to the way Lou Dort plays based on the other things that he does, whether it's the defensive tenacity, or if it's just like him taking the ball and putting it on the floor or getting the free throw line. I think there's a lot of other things that makes Dort a pretty intriguing player outside of the shooting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. He's so fun to watch, and we all hope that he's going to be part of our future. But the future of the Thunder is a little hard to figure out timeline wise. And this is really like the biggest question that we wanted to ask you. So a bit of a preamble to it, but. So we have SGA under contract until 2022 when he will be 23 years old. But all those draft assets we have won't have time to materialize or mature into useful players by that time. And SGA could be so good on his own that he could foil any plans to tank from, roughly 2021 to 2024. So all that considered, when should the Thunder try to contend? Should we trade assets now, or are we just gonna like try to do it on SGA's next contract? Yeah,
I firmly don't believe the Thunder are going to be trading anything now. I think that as it stands right now, and they may have put their heads together during this hiatus and changed their minds on some things. But I think that they view this as they have kind of an incredible opportunity to build a new type of team that really a lot of teams have lost patience in doing. There's not many teams that hold on to their picks in this way. And so the Thunder have such a war chest of draft capital that they can kind of build something unique. Now, I think that the SGA factor in this is really interesting because you do kind of have to ask yourself, how good is he, right? And I don't know that the Thunder know that yet. And I think we've seen some really positive elements, but at the same time, SGA has had Chris Paul basically removing all the burden off of him through so much of the season. And, I don't think the Thunder can really make that evaluation on Shea until they see him play without Chris Paul and to see what kind of player he really is. And if you have a guy that's like all NBA caliber, that might change your approach. That might make you say, okay, we've got one all NBA guy. Now, how do we pair another one with him? And, if you can find some sort of trade like what the Dallas Mavs made, where you go get Kristaps Porzingis, on an incredible bargain, and you give up spare parts to get a guy that's young and has potential superstar status to pair with another superstar, that's something they might adjust themselves to go do. But unless that next Porzingis is out there, I don't know that the Thunder would hit eject and go make a determination. And again, I don't know that they know with Shea yet. I just don't know that they feel like they have a body of work to say, okay, we know he's good. Everybody knows he's good, but is he that good? Is he somebody that is capable of being the A1 guy on a 45-win team? Is he that good, or is he more of your second level guy? So I think he's all-star caliber, but there is a difference between all-star and all-NBA. And I think the Thunder are looking for top-tier all-NBA guys to kind of build their roster around. So again, I don't think they'll know that until Chris Paul's no longer on the team.
Yeah, but like you say, the Thunder have the luxury of being able to wait precisely because we have all these picks.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it's one of those things that I think that for Thunder fans, they probably look at this and say, the team's good now. Like, keep them good. I like this. But, I think that if you looked at it kind of like, if you zoomed out and you looked at it with a perspective of, okay, let's just assume that this team in a vacuum, you remove all the like kind of the emotion and excitement of the overachieving. And you just looked at this Thunder team and you said, okay, and you draw it out on a chart. You say, okay, well, where are they going? Anybody in common sense would say, okay, their best player's 35 years old. They got a 30-year-old unrestricted free agent, Danilo Gallinari. They got a couple nice young players, but like that team's got to blow it up. Like their ceiling is second round most likely. They had a nice year, but that's not championship level. They probably need to blow it up. And
yep.
I think that like that would kind of be the feeling around the Thunder, but they've overachieved, and I think that they've kind of got this emotional boost around them. But if you roll this team back and they are, a 48-win team and then a 46-win team, people would be going like, what are we doing here? Like, I want to go to the Western Conference Finals again, So I think that's what the front office is trying to get to.
All right. Well, that's the last stop on the bus today. Royce, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, you bet, guys.
You can follow Royce on Twitter at Royce Young. You can follow us on Twitter at Thunder_Bus_pod, and we're on all the major podcatchers. Until next time, thanks for riding the bus this week, and Thunder up!